Bogotá, Colombia, just before 3 p.m. on the afternoon of December 2nd, 1993. From a hotel room, a 16-year-old is on the phone to his father, who is some 300 miles away in Medellin, Cocaine City. The son is one Pablo Escobar, the father, Pablo Escobar, the world's most wanted drug lord. The phones they're using and the words they speak are betraying them. On their trail is another father and son team, leading an elite squad of Colombian police.
Él está ahí. Vamos, adelante.
Algo está pasando.
Pablo Escobar was the king of cocaine. For years, he terrorized and murdered thousands of people and made billions of dollars. Now, the tables are about to be turned. Based on the testimony of those who survived and the transcripts of Escobar's own telephone conversations, this is the second-by-second story of Pablo Escobar's final hour. Pablo Escobar's last hour begins in a faceless house in a modest suburb of Medellin, Colombia. It's the final bolt hole, with just one guard and an aunt to care for him.
His taste in food was simple. I have to admit I wasn't a very good cook, but he ate everything I made him.
To this day, Escobar inspires passionate and contrasting views. To Aunt Luz Miller, he's simply the favorite and heroic nephew.
He was a very intelligent, beloved, serious, and sensitive person. In short, a man of quality. When he was alive, oh Maria, he could have been president. I tell you, he could have been president.
To his pursuers, he's simply the greatest criminal in history.
For me, he was a psychopath. That was a description of Pablo Escobar. He was a difficult man to understand because he had some social awareness. He liked to help the poor, but he also killed poor people.
Pero también asesinaba pobres.
I probably hated him. He was one of those individuals that, I despised.
Limón.
I wouldn't think twice about eliminating him if I had to, but I never thought about him with anger. I didn't see him like that.
Limón.
Even though cocaine made his fortune, Escobar has always steered clear of it. His favorite drug is cannabis.
Que no consigue esa maldita hierba, a ver.
Ya le di, ya eso se acabó, ya no tengo nada.
In his final hour, Escobar cuts a pathetic figure.
He was dirty. He had a beard, a huge beard. Very changed physically. Scruffy. We could have passed him in the street in Medellin and said hello, not knowing it was Escobar.
Escobar's last day has begun with spaghetti for breakfast, prepared by his Aunt Luz Miller. And where he once had a staff of hundreds, he's now reduced to just one bodyguard, a man nicknamed Lemon.
Limón.
Escobar wants to speak to his wife and children in Bogotá, but calling them will be fatal.
Llame a ver.
Whoever he pretends to be.
Diga que es un periodista.
Buenas tardes, Hotel Tequendama.
Aló, buenas tardes, doña Cecilia. Por favor, ¿me podrás comunicar con la familia Escobar?
But in 55 minutes, these calls will lead to death. Pablo Escobar waits to speak to his family. He knows it's possible his phone is bugged, so his bodyguard, pretending to be a journalist, sets up the call.
Coronel, están en la línea.
Dígale que no están contestando. Manténganlo en la línea que ustedes van a seguir intentando.
The phone operator is working for Colonel Hugo Martinez, who is in control of the whole operation to find Escobar.
Ellos están hablando otra vez. Ustedes no deben de estar tan lejos. Los Olivos no es un área tan grande.
Colonel Martinez's son, Hugo Jr., tracks Escobar's every word from a mobile surveillance unit.
Hugo has some surveillance equipment that scans the local area. It signals the strength and where the telephone signal is coming from. The nearer they get, the stronger it grows.
The blue signal follows the course of Hugo's van as he electronically scans the area, searching for Escobar's phone signal.
Lo siento, en este momento no me contestan, pero el teléfono sigue sonando.
The green signal behind Hugo's van is the search block assault team, the foot soldiers of the operation. They are led by Major Guillermo Aguilar.
Espere un momento.
Ok, gracias.
During an extraordinary life that has led to this final confrontation, Pablo Escobar has been a man of many faces. Businessman, sportsman, politician, victim, and family man. Local myth tells how by 16 he was already dealing in death. He'd steal gravestones, shave off the names, and resell them at bargain prices. Born into a culture of violence and rebellion near the mountainous city of Medellin, even Escobar's grandfather was a famous rum runner.
My brother was a good student and son. He was a person who had a few friends, but he was supremely faithful to his friends as a child.
This is the family story. In fact, he was just a small-time con man, car thief and kidnapper, until he discovered drugs. He soon learned that marijuana makes millions, but cocaine is king. He could make $1 million every day, and before long, he did. The key to Escobar's success was spectacularly simple. Everyone who dealt with him had a choice: plata or plomo, silver or lead. When he was arrested in 1976 with 39 kilos of cocaine, the judge received a death threat. The two arresting officers were murdered. The judge who signed his arrest warrant was murdered. The journalist who published an account of the arrest was murdered. The newspaper where the journalist worked was bombed. But now, from his safe house in Medellin, Escobar is trying to use the press to get public opinion behind him.
Okay.
¿Aló? Ya me contestaron.
Tío, que espero que están
Un
ocupados.
momento, ya lo comunico.
Ya estoy marcando. Ok, gracias.
His 16-year-old son, Juan Pablo, has set up an interview with a local newspaper. He relays the questions to his father. According to Colombian intelligence, Juan Pablo is already well steeped in the family's traditions.
We heard reports that when he was 16 years old, he was involved in the assassination of some policemen. Allegedly, he was being groomed by the father to basically take over the business.
The chances of that are now remote. Juan Pablo's role is now to be his father's intermediary with the press.
¿Qué más pues?
Escobar's purpose in giving an interview is to win public support for his campaign to get his family out of Colombia. In return, he's saying he will give himself up.
Estoy listo todavía, a ver, ¿cómo es la cosa?
Dicen que nos dan un enfoque muy teso, pues, pero que a nivel más familiar. Y nosotros tenemos que dar una imagen más familiar.
As Escobar receives the questions from his son, Colonel Martinez and Hugo listen intently, hoping to get a fix on his position.
Para que me tire las otras.
Bueno, si quieres hagamos una cosa.
Señor.
Vuélvame a llamar ahorita y yo le tengo el número del fax.
Lo que pasa es que son muchas preguntas.
There's a strange symmetry about this story. Two families, two fathers and sons, playing a deadly game of cat and mouse.
He knew we were recording him, listening to him through electronic surveillance. He didn't allow himself any phone calls longer than 2 or 3 minutes. he would cut them off saying, "Stop there, don't speak anymore." He was very careful so we couldn't find him.
Voltea aquí a la izquierda.
Escobar está ahí. Oye, es lejos. ¿Dónde está? Necesitamos la información.
Dele. Así.
A secret US Army surveillance team, codenamed Centra Spike, flying above Medellin, is helping the search. It pinpoints Escobar's phone transmissions and relays them to mobile units like Hugo's. But the pinpoint is 600 meters wide. It's up to Hugo to find the source of the signal within that zone. It's a delicate task, made even harder by Escobar's short calls and the usual habit of speaking from mobile phones on the move in taxis.
Well, there were numerous stories, numerous reports about him being in a taxi. There was one report, I remember, that he was in a taxi wearing dressed like a nun.
Muy bien. Por favor, siga así.
The men of the search block don't know if Escobar is moving or still today, but they do know what to expect when they find him.
Of course we were very scared. He had already killed thousands of people. He killed 600 of our policemen just in Antioquia, plus the ones he'd killed elsewhere. So the moment he started killing, and the moment we knew that he was offering $1,000 per dead policeman, we knew who we were facing.
In this, his final hour, Pablo Escobar may still be free, but not as he was in his heyday. In the early 1980s, Escobar had his own private zoo. He was moving hundreds of tons of cocaine into the United States every year. Forbes magazine reckoned Escobar was worth over $7 billion. That's more dollars than there are people on Earth.
Shipments of multi-hundred kilos of cocaine were quite common. And it got to the point that an airplane would come to the United States loaded with cocaine, make a drop either offshore or somewhere in a clandestine area. And the airplane would go back full of $20 bills, to Colombia. So it got to a point where money was not counted in Colombia, it was weighed.
Wealth and power were never enough for Escobar. He wanted to be respected, admired, even loved. And as extraordinary as it may seem, he really was loved.
Precisely where there was a lot of poverty, he helped people. He gave them housing. He gave them money and things. The poor appreciate that.
He built and gave a whole neighborhood for the homeless, known as Barrio Pablo Escobar.
They admired him. For them, he was a Robin Hood. He robbed to help the poor. Or so he made it look.
In return, the poor were ferociously loyal. They became his army of spies on street corners, in taxis, even inside the police itself. Teenage murderers queued up to gun down Escobar's enemies. He was so popular that by 1982 he was voted into the Colombian Congress. But soon after being elected, Escobar was publicly denounced as a drug trafficker and forced to resign his seat. It all began to unravel. On March 10, 1984, the Colombian Minister of Justice, Rodrigo Lara, authorized the seizure of a group of cocaine laboratories hidden in the jungle of Caquetá province. It turned out to be the biggest cocaine seizure in history. $1 billion of Escobar's cocaine was destroyed. Furious, he had Justice Minister Lara gunned down in his car. the Colombian government hit back with a new tactic. It introduced laws to allow drug traffickers to be extradited and tried in the United States. For Escobar, this meant war. No one crossed him and lived, as one former business partner discovered.
But somehow or other, this individual did something that Escobar did not approve of. And he wanted to make an example of him in front of everybody else. And allegedly, they hung him from the tree by the arms and poured gasoline on him and burned him. And the whole message was, this is what happens if you cross me.
Another thing he used to say, when a cockroach is killed, I get the blame. If anyone is killed, I get the blame. Everything was blamed on him.
But Pablo's sins have caught up with him. He has 40 minutes to live.
Mira, papi, es que son muchas. Son por ahí 40 preguntas.
¿No será que me las puede enviar? Siga.
The Escobars are back on the phone. Hugo is honing in on Pablo Escobar's signal.
¿Qué hago, mi teniente? Siga así. Mantenga la misma velocidad.
Hugo keeps circling his target, fed with information from his assistant in the back of the van. From the strength of the signal he's now getting, Hugo believes Escobar is hiding very nearby. His suspicions are zeroing in on the Obelisco shopping mall.
¿Dónde estás? ¿Qué estás haciendo?
Estamos muy cerca.
Manténganse atrás. Esperen hasta que confirme. No quiero que ustedes ataquen hasta que estemos seguros.
De acuerdo, mi coronel.
Hugo.
Sí. Creo que él está allí.
¿Estás seguro, Hugo?
Though Hugo is now convinced Escobar is hiding in the shopping mall, a strange ghosting effect on the signal is puzzling him. Even so, he thinks an all-out attack is worth the risk.
Da otra vuelta, hay que estar seguros.
After 5 years of searching for Escobar and several unsuccessful raids, the pressure on Hugo to be right is enormous. His father, his colleagues, in fact the whole country, await his next move.
Sí. Sí. Él está allí. Está en el edificio. Pare. Allá. Allá. Uno, conmigo. Vamos, vamos. Ojo. Ojos.
Bueno, si quieres hagamos una cosa, señor. Puede llamar ahorita y yo le tengo el número del fax.
Hugo now sees there is a problem. If Escobar was somewhere in the shopping mall, he would be hearing and reacting to the commotion around him. But wherever Escobar is, all is quiet.
Bueno, entonces suerte.
Evading his pursuers has always been an Escobar speciality. 8 years before, he'd waged a populist campaign against the potentially lethal threat of extradition to the United States.
Yo estoy en desacuerdo con el tratado de extradición porque el tratado de extradición viola la Constitución colombiana en 23 artículos, atenta contra los derechos humanos porque todo el pueblo colombiano está contra él.
He used to say, I prefer a grave in Colombia to jail in the United States.
That said, Escobar enjoyed thumbing his nose at the Americans by slipping in undetected for a little sightseeing, as this photo outside the White House shows. Then, on November the 6th, 1985, Escobar violently raised the stakes in his effort to thwart the extradition laws. The Marxist guerrilla group M19 seized the Palace of Justice in downtown Bogotá. 11 of the country's 24 high court judges were killed in the battle. It looked like an unrelated political disaster. However, many believed Escobar had paid M19 $1 million to attack the building, and while they were at it, destroy all the records of cases against the drug lords. Charges against Escobar literally went up in smoke.
Colombian society was actually caving into the pressures that Escobar was putting on them. And they just wanted the bombing to stop. They didn't care what the government did as long as the bombing stopped.
The country was crumbling in the face of Escobar's onslaught. The government turned to the American president, George Bush, for help.
Our outrage against drugs unites us, brings us together behind this one plan of action. For the drug kingpins, the death penalty.
President Bush sent in the experts.
Pero había una ayuda muy importante que era de la DEA.
We received some important help from the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency. They trained us in special operations, combat shooting, and explosives. They gave us electronic surveillance and scanning technology to do triangulation and to listen to all the movements of Pablo Escobar's organization.
And so began the search block, the elite squad under the command of Colonel Martinez, which for 5 years has hunted Escobar.
Haremos sin descanso porque queremos vivir en otro país y estudiar modestamente, sin guardaespaldas, clandestinamente y ojalá con el nombre y el apellido cambiado. ¿La cogió, mijo?
Aguilar.
By now it's clear that the search in the shopping mall has gone badly wrong.
Algo está mal.
Hugo.
No.
Hugo.
No. Escobar no está aquí.
There's a further problem. Amidst all the confusion, the search block miss Hugo's call that Escobar isn't in the shopping center. Hugo heads off alone to find Escobar. Pablo Escobar has terrorized and outwitted the Colombian authorities for years. Though he seems to have escaped again, it's just 30 minutes till the dragnet closes in. While the search block look for Escobar in Medellin's huge Obelisco shopping mall, Hugo tries frantically to work out why the raid has gone wrong.
Hugo, ¿qué pasó? ¿Qué pasó? ¿Por qué no cogimos a Escobar?
No sé qué pasó. Todo parece indicar que él estaba aquí. Tuvimos un problema con la señal.
¿Qué pasó con la señal?
No sé, es como un reflejo, como de agua.
Por Dios,
pero...
Hugo. No puede ser.
Yo por aquí no veo nada de agua.
It turns out Hugo is right about the signal being reflected off water. Unbeknownst to him, there is a storm drain running between the shopping center and where Escobar is really hiding. That is what caused the ghosting effect and led him astray.
¿Para dónde, mi teniente? Siga derecho. Voltea aquí a la izquierda.
Now alone, Hugo has to trust more than his equipment. He has to trust himself.
Bien, vamos bien.
He follows his instinct, the signal, and the water that keeps crossing his path.
Por favor, aquí una derecha.
This time, he's right. He's heading towards the red signal coming from Escobar's hideout. Meanwhile, the search block are still at the shopping center.
No está aquí, mi coronel.
Where once he would have been constantly on the move, lately Escobar has become more sedentary. Maybe it's the cannabis. Maybe it's just middle age. Only the night before, he celebrated his 44th birthday.
Gracias, tía. Es una belleza, carajo.
Felicidades, don Pablo.
Gracias, Limón.
That day, something very strange happened that had an effect on me. As I was about to serve the birthday champagne to Pablo and Limón, the glass fell on the floor. It didn't break.
¡Qué buena suerte! No se rompió.
¡Qué suerte que hay, doña Rosmila! Es una mala suerte que no se haya roto.
Look at what happened the next day. That's when I realized his premonition was true. And there was another thing. That day, there had been a fly buzzing around Pablo's face. Like this. Like this, like this. It was one of those that feed on corpses. That was the day before the death.
Escobar is now on phone call number 3, in the final hour continuing the campaign to win safe refuge for his wife, son and daughter.
Amigo, dígales que mi padre no se va a entregar antes de nuestra ubicación en el exterior. Antes de nuestra ubicación en el exterior. Mientras la Dijín en Antioquia.
La Dijín entonces no es mejor.
La Dijín, no más.
Bueno.
Escobar was a man rarely beaten. By June 1991, he bombed Colombia to a standstill. The government threw in the towel and finally cancelled the extradition law. In exchange, Escobar handed himself in, knowing he'd won again. He was sent to prison, but very much on his own terms.
In La Catedral, the prison where Escobar spent some time after he turned himself in, was really nothing more than a country club. He was calling the shots on operations. He was receiving a percentage of anything that took place, throughout the Medellin cartel. He built a discotheque in the prison. He built a soccer field with lights. The prison cells were better than most hotels in Colombia. It was an incredible facility, incredible.
It was both his fortress and Aladdin's cave.
¿Qué fue lo que pasó, mi coronel? No pasó nada. Esté alerta.
Escobar used his mountaintop fortress overlooking Medellin to rebuild his empire and settle old scores.
He ended up suspecting even his inner circle. He was already a bit paranoid.
In July 1992, he called a meeting of senior traffickers. Suspecting his business partners, the Moncada and Galliano brothers, of creaming off profits, he hung them upside down and tortured them to death.
Torture turned into actually cutting off fingers, hands, and in essence, ripping the body apart in an effort to make sure that they would never be found.
President Gaviria tried to move Escobar to a real prison, but Escobar was having none of it. He simply walked past the army battalions sent to get him and escaped. They were too intimidated to stop him.
It was just like, I'm going, and he went. He fooled everyone, including the authorities. By the time the sun came up, he'd been gone 2 or 3 hours.
But by leaving his luxury fortress, Escobar had made the biggest mistake of his life. The government's answer was to throw money at the problem and offer a large reward for his capture. Escobar's former business associates had their own solution. They started to throw bombs at him. Enraged by the murder of the Moncada and Galliano brothers, and worried they would be next, Escobar's old trafficking pals revolted. A vigilante group appeared, known as Los Pepes, people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. They wreaked a terrible and sudden revenge.
In essence, they used the same tactics that Pablo utilized to control the country. And they didn't stop at anything. They burned homes, they burned buildings, they assassinated followers of Pablo that were still with him. They left signs on the bodies saying that they were killed by the Los Pepes because they were collaborators of Pablo Escobar. Los Pepes systematically destroyed Pablo's organization. They killed his attorneys, they killed his bodyguards,
Without warning, Escobar had gone from hunter to hunted.
They also killed my sister Lucy. They killed her husband, they killed the cleaner. She was pregnant. That day, they killed 4 people.
It's now less than 15 minutes to the final shootout.
No es mejor. Ah, bueno.
Mientras los diferentes organismos en Antioquia sigan secuestrando, torturando y cometiendo masacres en las esquinas.
Absorbed in his telephone interview, Escobar has no idea that Hugo is now only yards away.
Dígales que nosotros estamos dispuestos a tocar todas las puertas de las embajadas del mundo.
Él está allí. Escobar está allí. Voltea en la esquina.
It's an extraordinary moment, as after 5 long years, the hunter and the hunted have locked eyes.
Papá, papá, lo encontré, lo cogí, lo encontré, papá.
¿Dónde?
Aquí, está en la casa. No, pero no sé, yo creo que él me vio, él debe estar con sus sicarios, no sé, a lo mejor hay más en la calle, no sé.
With Escobar now finally within reach, Colonel Martinez is faced with the hardest decision of his career, to do his duty or to protect his son's life.
Quédese exactamente donde está. Cuiden bien el frente y atrás de la casa. Y no lo dejen salir.
¿Pero cuánto tiempo más debe estar aquí?
Hágalo. Aguilar. Aguilar. Escobar no está ahí. Hugo lo tiene.
Then I answered, you must face him if the assault team doesn't get there in time. I was so overwhelmed that we'd found him. We had waited for so long. I was sure we would catch him now.
Pare. Cubra la parte de atrás y no permita que nadie salga por esa puerta, ¿me entendió? Nadie. Vamos, dele. Voltea aquí, voltea aquí. Pare. Saque su arma.
¿Quién? ¿Yo, mi teniente?
Sí, usted, ya. Mire, el número es 45 de 94, ¿me entendió? En toda la mitad de la cuadra a la derecha. Vaya y cubra la parte de atrás que yo cubro el frente.
Nosotros nos vamos a meter ahí, ¿cierto, mi teniente? Usted y yo solos vamos a coger a Pablo Escobar.
Vamos a asegurar las puertas, hermano. El bloque debe estar por llegar, ¿me entendió?
With the search block still some distance away, Hugo and his drive are prepared to tackle the world's most feared criminal on their own.
Mi hijo, usted las organiza bien. La fotografía.
Here he is with one driver, Pablo in this house, with no idea with how many people in that house. I can't imagine what Hugo Martinez thought at that moment. I mean, here is a situation where there had been so many false alarms, there had been so many close calls, and finally feeling that he had Pablo in his sight.
Es la razón por la cual ningún país quiere darle a usted y a su familia albergue.
Dígales que la familia le ha negado la entrada, simplemente porque no conocen la verdadera realidad.
By April 1993, with his empire in ruins, Escobar was frantic to save the only thing he had left, his family. He tried to send them to Miami, but their visas were revoked by DEA agents at the airport.
¿Por qué se querían ir?
Why did they want to go? Because of what the Pepes were doing. Their enemies were their own drug traffickers, their own ex-colleagues. They were bombing his family and his properties, threatening his family.
Amenazando a su familia.
In response, Escobar bombed Bogotá in a fit of rage, killing innocent civilians. Faced with Escobar's relentless carnage, some feel Los Pepes were a necessary evil.
There are places in this world where traditional methods, democratic methods, do not work. Maybe the only way that you can strive for solutions is through unorthodox methods such as using violence, fighting violence with violence. And it's a sad story, it's a sad truth, and that's reality.
Just 4 days from the end, Escobar made a final bid to save his family. This time he sent Juan Pablo, his mother and sister to Germany, but they were refused entry and forced to return in humiliation to Bogotá. The Colombian authorities offered them protection at the Hotel Tequendama, but in Escobar's eyes, his family were now being held by the very people who wanted them dead. The inability even to protect his family showed just how far Escobar had now fallen.
Escobar basically lost it, and he entered a state in which he stopped taking care of the little things that kept him alive. He stopped moving around when he spoke on the phone. He started making calls to the newspapers, to senators, to everybody he could in a desperate, frantic effort to try and get him to do something to help his family. And that was his downfall. That's how he was tracked down.
With 4 minutes to 0 hour, Hugo is still alone.
Bueno, ¿cuáles fueron las razones para que usted y su familia saliera el sábado pasado rumbo a Alemania?
¿Usted qué contestó?
At last, at 3 minutes to 3, the search block arrives. Quickly and quietly, the men surround the house, and marksmen position themselves in the street behind.
Sí. ¿Había algún compromiso?
As Escobar continues his conversation, the trap snaps shut around him.
Algo está pasando. ¡Cobarde gonorrea, hijo de puta!
Limon flees, leaving Escobar to fight alone. The death of Pablo Escobar is surrounded by as much legend as his life. First, the official version.
Pablo! ¡Es Pablo! ¿Estás bien?
Yeah.
¿Estás bien?
Yes, yes.
Avanzamos.
We took cover when the shooting started outside.
Y afuera hubo
There
muchos
were at
tiros,
least
por lo menos
300
300
shots.
disparos.
¡Viva Colombia! ¡Está muerto el Pablo Escobar!
We all heard, "Long live Colombia," and understood Pablo Escobar had fallen.
There are, however, other versions. One is that Pablo Escobar was felled by a killing shot straight through the ears. Some American researchers claim this amazing feat could only have been done by a US sniper from the ultra-secret Delta Force.
That's absolutely false.
I am confident that the Delta Force had nothing to do with this.
Escobar's family has another theory.
He committed suicide. He did not get killed. During all the years they went after him, he would say to me every day, if he was really cornered, without a way out, he would shoot himself through the ears. And he shot himself through the ears.
I don't believe they killed him. He killed himself. Because he used to say, I prefer a grave in Colombia to jail in the United States.
There's one final and less romantic theory.
¡Es Pablo! ¡Es Pablo!
Whatever happened on the roof that day, Pablo Escobar passed into legend. Grief exploded amongst his thousands of bereaved supporters. Yet some believe his death was just Escobar's last trick.
I think he is still alive. It's not possible to get a man with so much money, who always stayed ahead of the law, who just walked out of jail so many times. I think he gave a load of cash to some guy who was tired of life. The family would be rich, and he would die instead of Pablo.
They admired him like he was Robin Hood. He did spectacular things. He helped the poor, so people don't want his name to die. But he was only a man. He's buried in Medellín.
Eran las 3 de la tarde y empiezan a disparar. Les gritan, no soy cobarde, me llaman Pablo Escobar. Con el poder del dinero hizo temblar la nación.
Escobar's death casts a shadow that stretches to this very day. When Pablo, his mother and sister Manuela fled to Argentina and changed their names, but are still being chased as the Escobars. Roberto Escobar survived Los Pepes and jail until one day he opened a parcel in the post. His sight and hearing have been permanently damaged. Guillermo Aguilar was hailed for his part in Pablo's death. He is now the governor of Colombia's Santander province. Hugo Martinez Jr. was so overwhelmed by the discovery of Escobar that he was unable to even fire his gun when the final moment arrived. After surviving years of danger, Hugo died in a traffic accident in 1999. Colonel Martinez was promoted to general, but retired in 2003. He now lives a quiet life, without his son, painting. Luzmila Gaviria was lucky. She went shopping that afternoon and survived, but believes Escobar still takes care of her.
4 days later, I dreamed I was cooking fried fish for him, and he was hugging me, happy. I'm sure he was thanking me, like he was saying goodbye. Sometimes I ask, Pablito, help me, and he does.
Did the death of Pablo Escobar make any difference to the blizzard of cocaine that blows across America? Despite all the killing, cocaine only got cheaper and more plentiful than even Escobar could ever have dreamed.